12 minutes to 6 o'clock, and your confession, please, to confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. As we grab something pleasant from the drinks trolley, what are you taking for us, Suze, from the pub?
I've gone for a Greyfriars Rosé Reserve. It's a fizzy. It's from the Surrey Hills, and it's very delicious.
How many glasses would you say? Just a half, maybe?
Yeah, just a little one. Why not? Start the week.
Okay, so thank you very much. So thank you to, we'll have one of those. Thank you very much indeed. Top recommendation. Today's confession comes from Kurt. Thank you, Kurt, for today's tale. Something sounds a little bit strange, but I'm not quite sure why. I'm going to... What do you think that might be? Strange sound.
I think it sounds fine now.
Okay, that's very good.
Yeah.
It's probably Susie's fault.
Yeah, probably.
So, blame it on the producer. So Kurt says, Father Simon and the Holy Collective, I wish to confess not just to yourselves, but to, dare I say it, the Almighty himself. Cast your mind back to the exceptionally hot summer of 1976 and a church in a small town in the, shall we say, East Midlands. It was a cracking time, full of soda streams, popping candy, tree swings, bazooka bubblegum, and catching jars full of strange-looking fish from the brook and returning them home to a mum who immediately poured them down the drain. It's a very specific memory that I think which no one else shares apart from Kurt and his family.
Yeah.
Now, can I just add, says Kurt, as my extended family, including myself, still attend the said church for fetes, fairs and fun days, I think my anonymity is well advised in order to protect my status as a thoroughly good all-round chap. Little do they know. At this point, I live with my parents, and as far as they and the wider community were concerned, I was an upstanding, pleasant and likeable 10-year-old. I was a member of the Boys Brigade at the church, winning the county psalm reading competition in this particular year. Wow.
The best at reading the Psalms.
Yes, all of them, particularly 119. That goes on a while.
Yeah.
And I was doing well at school. So as far as my family was concerned, all was good with the world. Unfortunately, like most 10-year-old boys in the 70s, I was a member of a gang. There wasn't an apple tree that hadn't been scrumped, a door we hadn't knocked and ran, or a garden fence that we hadn't hopped. All good, clean fun in our day. Constable Nat Weed would only chase us half-heartedly and shake his fist, so everything was fine.
Yeah.
Father Simon, I come to the reason for this confession. The 50s council estate on which we lived and its church, which we attended for the Boys Brigade, had a roof of a modernist style, which swept down to chest height and then rose up into the heavens. Utterly climbable, I think you'll agree, and certainly in our book, and a challenge not to be overlooked. So many evenings would be spent, obviously, should have said at the beginning, don't try this at home.
Right, okay.
My guess is that Sister Susie has disappeared somewhere into the ether because there's nothing coming out the pub at the moment. Anyway, so utterly climbable and a challenge not to be overlooked. So many evenings would be spent climbing up the roof and traversing the rooftops, which, when I look at the height of the roof now, seems like an absolutely crazy thing to attempt. But to a fearless bunch of 10-year-olds, it was water off a duck's back. We basically invented parkour. That's what I'm going to say.
Yes.
This is where it all started, in the East Midlands in 1976. Now, to be expected, this didn't go down too well with the church vicar, who could be seen on many occasions trying to outrun us, adorned in his flailing cassock. It was a hopeless task, akin to herding cats. Now, fortunately for us, we only attempted our rooftop shenanigans in the gloom of an evening, so he never recognised any of us. So as the long, hot summer went on, and unbeknownst to my gang, our escapades had come to the attention of the police, who had contacted Anglia Television to run a local news article about the dangers of climbing the said church roof and also the damage it was causing to the tiles. So at this point, a confession would be in order just for what we had done so far and the consternation and cost that we had caused to the church and the constabulary. But this is where I feel we rubbed salt into an already open wound. The day came when filming of the news report was to occur, and being on my gang's patch, we watched keenly as they set up the cameras and lighting for the reporter, and what was to be a reconstruction of what the perpetrators of this villainous crime were doing. This required several volunteers from the crowd, preferably young children, to climb up to a safe height of the roof to show to the watching public at home how dangerous this behaviour was. Now, being on our patch, we weren't going to allow just anyone to undertake such a task, and especially as we'd be on the telly, plus the promise of pop and chips afterwards. Now, of course, being the 70s, sending young children up a church roof was a perfectly normal thing to do.
Fine,
Unlike nowadays, when this might be utterly frowned upon, with the Health and Safety Brigade, what, putting children up a church roof? Probably yes. So there we were, reconstructing climbing the church roof, being thanked by the local parishioners, the police, the TV people, and surrounded by our exceptionally proud parents, with not an ounce of guilt from any of us, I have to admit. We were the actual criminals reenacting our own crime, and no one knew. Not a problem on Crime Watch, I would imagine, or questions would be raised. So I would like to ask forgiveness, not just from ourselves, but the Church of England, the local constabulary, and, well, anyone who happens to remember the article on the Anglian News on that day, which is highly unlikely being 48 years ago, but it may tweak someone's memory of that day, especially as we were the talk of the town for a short while, as the local paper also picked up the story and splashed our smug, pop-stained faces all over the front page. Well, I think it's a very entertaining story. So here's a terrible crime. Let's get some kids to reenact it.
Yes.
Let's get these kids. Now, I'm imagining Sister Susie isn't there.
Hello?
Oh, she is there. Okay,
is.
you disappeared with a little bit of howl round, which was an interesting moment. Did you hear any of the confession?
Yeah, I did hear it. I think it's very dangerous. No children should be on the roof of any building, never mind a church.
Correct. So
Not
therefore,
forgiven.
not forgiven. Okay, I think that's
okay.
probably quite right. The voice of responsibility. However, brother from another gutter.
Big fan of this confession. Parkour and the Flailing Cassocks. Seen them live. Very, very good. I'm going to forgive, and here's the reason why.
Yes.
Is my instinct is that during the summer, Anglia Telly were desperate for anything to put on their news, because normally nothing's happening in the middle of summer. So they were very happy when they got this story about children running across the church roofs, and it is down to them if they decide to send children up there to do it again. So for that reason, I'm going to forgive.
For that reason, you're
For that
going to
reason.
forgive. Okay. So the People's Verdict, please, do you forgive Kurt? 61054. Just before the news, a very entertaining confession from Kurt, who back in the long hot summer of 76 was in a gang on his housing estate, and they climbed on the roof of the church, and they climbed very high, much to the annoyance of the clergy and the police, who contacted the local television people at Anglia. They staged a reenactment, and who could they get to be involved in the reenactment? Oh, you kids, who were like the very kids who'd made the criminal trespass in the first place. Kurt, thank you very much indeed for the confession. You get the smart speaker, the People's Verdict, like this.
Everyone's forgiving tonight. John says, I have to forgive this hilarious story. He committed the crime and then returned to the scene of the crime to reenact the crime.
Yes.
Fantastic. Ricky says, forgiven. At junior school in the 70s, our gang used to retrieve all the tennis balls and footballs from the school roof. Some 60-foot drop from the roof. Facepalm emoji, different times.
Yes, very
laughing
much
emoji.
so.
And finally, Alan says, forgiven. So, the truth is out at last. I remember this so well. I was that policeman.
Wow.
My son was one of the kids who did the reenactment for the cameras. Now I know the truth. He never admitted being one of the perpetrators, though. Forgiven, but he owes me a pint on Sunday lunchtime.
And who's that from?
That's from Alan, happily retired in Sherwood Forest, Notts.
So the policeman involved, the father of one of the criminals, responding to the confession.
Yes.
This is the power of Greatest Hits Radio. All right, very good. Kurt, thank you very much. You get the smart speaker. If you have a confession, send it to confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. Meantime, there's something to be grabbed from the trolley. Let's just find out what it is. What have you grabbed for us, producer Sister Susie? Oh, hang on. There you go.
No.
No? Okay. What do you think she's...
I think she's going to get a big pint of lager. That's what I think.
An American pale ale, in fact.
Oh, well,
there you go.
almost, yeah.
What happened there, then? You run out of batteries. An American pale ale. I like a bit of a pale ale, actually. Which one
Yes,
is it?
called Word. Said like that because there's lots of R's. By Electric Bear. 4.2%.
4.2, okay, that's fine. That's all right. That's a good one.
Like a half, maybe?
Yes, that's very good, but not before we've finished the show, I don't think.
Of
Today's
course.
confession comes from Nigel. And I'm going to give this a 15 certificate.
15?
For very, very loose morals.
Oh, right, just for the loose morals.
Yes.
Fine.
Father Mayo, Sister Susie, brother from another gutter, the Confessional Collective, says, Nigel, I have a confession that goes back to something I did many years ago, and the effects of my actions have been troubling me ever since, as they should do. The incident took place New Year's Eve 2003, and as ever, I was at my friend's house. We'll call them Grant and Katie. This year, their eldest daughter, who we'll call Steph, had reached the landmark age of 18 and had decided she was going to the pub with her friends to celebrate New Year instead of remaining with us oldies and her younger siblings. Well, after spending the many hours preparing herself for the evening, Steph trotted off about 8 o'clock-ish, 4 of her friends to have a good time, but she said she'd be back just before midnight to let in the New Year with her family. It's a bit early to go for a New Year confession, but anyway.
Why not?
Our evening continued as it always did, with activities including drinking, eating, drinking, talking, drinking, generally playing the fool, and a little bit of drinking. There were no new guests this year that Grant and I could try and hide in the freezer, and everybody there was wise to our standard trick, so a new approach was required. After what had been a particularly quiet evening for us, at about 10 minutes before midnight, 5 slightly merry girls arrived back for Steph to celebrate New Year with her family. As they entered the room, all 5 managed to pour themselves into a heap on the floor, and Steph went round the room introducing everybody to her 4 guests. This is my mum, Katie, my nan, Ethel, Dean, my brother, Nancy, my sister, and that's Grant, my dad, and that is Nigel, my godfather. At this point, I, Nigel, said, "How do you know?" "What?" said Steph's instant reply. "How do you know he's your dad and I'm your godfather? Even your mother doesn't know for sure." "Yep, that's right," adds Grant.
What?
You see what I'm getting at?
Oh, my.
At this point, the sherry trifle that Ethel had just put in her mouth was being sprayed across the room as she tried to stifle the laughter. The dog was happy and was making a good job of clearing up all the evidence. Steph's jaw hit the floor, as did all of her friends' jaws, to be honest. Nobody else batted an eyelid. "What?" was the only thing Steph could manage. I continued, "Well, you know Grant and I are close, and you know how lazy he can be, so sometimes I helped out, and your mum was happy with the arrangement, so when she got pregnant, nobody was sure who the father was."
Oh, my goodness.
Yes,
Wowza.
yes, that's right, says Grant. It didn't really matter who the father was, so we didn't bother to find out. "Mum!" screamed Steph. Katie had been busy chatting and so far had missed what I'd said to our daughter. "What?" asked Katie. "Well, what Nigel and Dad are saying, is it true?" "What have they said?" "That Nigel's my dad and Dad isn't." An almost hyperventilating Steph screamed out. Katie at this point must have given the most unhelpful answer possible. "Oh, not that old chestnut again."
Right.
And instantly returned to the conversation she was having with the person next to her, completely oblivious to what Steph thought she had just confirmed. I have never seen 5 teenagers go from happily merry to stone cold sober so quickly in my life. At this point, Steph stood up and ran hysterically to her room, closely followed by her 4 friends who felt they had to comfort her, not to seem for the rest of the night, and missing the New Year in with her parents. Grant and I continued drinking as we were before. The girls returned. Katie continued her in-depth conversation with whoever she was talking to. In the following months, when Steph was being particularly teenager-ish, Katie would say, "Wait till your father gets home." And when Grant did arrive home, he would always say, "No, she doesn't mean me, she means your real dad," and that would be the end of it. How long Steph was left to wonder what the truth is unknown to me. I do not seek forgiveness from Katie for implying that she was a good-time girl in the past. I do not seek forgiveness from Grant for claiming I had spent time with his wife. I do not seek forgiveness from Ethel for the wasted sherry trifle. I do not seek forgiveness from Steph for so publicly announcing that I could be her father and throwing her entire concept of family life out of the window. No. I seek forgiveness from Steph's 4 friends, who on the first New Year's Eve that they could legally spend in a pub, only had me dropping my bombshell on Steph at 10 to midnight, and for them to have to spend New Year stone cold sober. I would like to point out that these events had no long-term effect on Steph, and she still talks to me and Grant as though we're old fossils and a pain in her derriere.
Yes, of
but
course.
she never has sent me a Father's Day card.
Oh,
well.
right, no.
I think Nigel sounds like a pain in the neck, to be perfectly honest. That's
right. Leading the jury.
Yes, I am leading the jury here, so I know precisely what... I could hear Sister Susie gasping. So over to you, Sister Suze.
Well, Nigel, I just don't think you don't want forgiveness. So, I think you should want forgiveness because that's just. I don't forgive you or Grant. I get Grant involved in this. He shouldn't have gone along with it, and Katie for that matter too. I just think that if I was that person and that was me, that'd be horrible to think that my dad wasn't my dad and to talk about my mum like that in front of all your friends as well. How embarrassing! No, thank you. Not forgiven.
Not forgiven. I think, Matt.
I'm going to forgive. Just because, embarrassing the kids, you know what they're like. He was unlikely to be breaking this news on New Year's Eve. She should have known that. And everyone else went along with it. It was all fine. And he's not really interested in forgiveness anyway. And also you were spurred having the teenagers around on New Year's Eve. Well done all round for that.
But Steph was hysterical and she was very, very upset.
I'm sure they all went to the room and talked about Taylor Swift or whatever. So for that reason, I'm going to forgive.
In 2003?
She was huge in 2003.
I know she has been around a while.
Yeah, she was. Yeah,
Okay.
Very big.
All right. Now, I suspect that people are going to be very cross with this one.
Yeah.
And they're going to be unforgiving. But who knows?
Who knows?
Do you forgive Nigel, yes or no? On the text, please, 61054. First word is Simon. More in just a moment. However, before the news, we heard from Nigel. A shocking tale. Who was is a godfather. The whole thing is, he's a godfather. What are you supposed to be as a godfather? A moral example.
That's true.
And then basically let Steph, his goddaughter, believe he might be her father as a prank fueled by alcohol. Going to hell.
No.
Anyway, people's verdict. Here we go.
Sarah in Worthing is not forgiving. No. Everything about this confession is cringe, she says. Lying to Steph, making the wife sound like she'd been with two blokes. Just no. Yes. Samantha in Woking says not forgiven. He didn't even want forgiveness for upsetting Steph. She's never going to forget that New Year's. I imagine she's scarred for life. But Gary in Leeds says forgiven. Class wind up. No real harm meant considering flow of alcohol.
I'm sorry, that's not acceptable.
Oh, is it not? Right.
Wow. Gary, that's the wrong answer.
Oh, sorry, Gary.
Just saying.
Yeah.
Anyway, you have a confession, not saying you're going to get forgiven, but you will get a smart speaker. Maybe Nigel should give it to his goddaughter. That's all I'm saying.
Nope.
If you fancy the smart speaker, send your confession, please. confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. What have you grabbed, Sister Susie, as it went past?
I've grabbed an orange juice and soda, so non-alky today, and I had one the other day. I haven't had one for years, and it was delicious.
Is that like so you've mixed a proper orange juice with some soda water?
Yes, we sell little orange juices, little bottles of orange juice in the pub. One of those in a pint glass, topped up with soda.
Very nice. Thank you very much indeed. Always drink responsibly. Today's confession comes from Alexander. Thank you, Alexander. Dear Father Simon, sisters Holly, sick and wrong, Susie, and brother from another gutter, that'll be Matthew. I have become... This is another Boys Brigade confession, actually. We just had one this week, got another one.
Yeah.
I have become an avid listener to the show, and more recently, due to working stupidly late shifts, the podcast. And it was whilst catching up with the latter that my past misdeeds came crawling back, and I decided to seek absolution. I was a young leader in the Boys Brigade for a pretty considerable number of days. I do miss it, and I miss a lot of the people, but not all. Like Sister Holly, I've never agreed with the idea of having older kids taking on leadership over their peers. I'm the leader, I'm in charge. I mean, please.
Yeah.
And one boy, I said that in a kind of a Holly style.
You did. It was like she was in the room.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. And one boy in particular really was the epitome of this mentality. He was the leader's firstborn. And the sense of entitlement that came with this was practically dripping off him. He was always the flag bearer for church parades. He took the lead in the marching band and was always put forward as tent leader on camps. It was at the start of one such camp that my plan to bring him down a peg or two came to a head. You really sound like a strong leader.
Yes.
Alexander. The camp was for various Boys Brigade companies in the area. Took place at a campsite run by the Scout movement. There were the usual activities during the day: archery, abseiling, football tournaments, you know, the usual sort of thing. But once ablutions and evening prayers were done, it was settling in, making sure tents and belongings were tidy, and an early night ready for the next day's excitement. Well, Father Simon, as I said, the boy in question was tent leader, and he took the most haphazard approach to making sure everything was tidy, knowing that he would most likely get away with it. And I had been reminded by one of the scout leaders working at the site of the old Capture the Flag game. On the first night of the week-long camp, the tent was loud, and I had hoped to remind the boys several times that they needed to keep the noise down. The noise levels dropped but very quickly raised back up every time they thought no one was listening. So I could wait no longer. I took a bin bag, filled it with all sorts of bits and pieces which had been left around the tent, general mess and filth, and waited until silence had fallen. I then swapped out the campsite's flag with the bin bag and retired to bed. The next morning at Reveille, the bugle sounded and the camp gathered. The site manager issued an ultimatum. If the flag was returned and the perpetrator owned up, it would be taken as simple hijinks. If not, there would be suitable punishment. Well, the flag was found. I'd hidden it somewhere safe. I didn't want any harm to come to it. But of course the boys didn't come forward. How could they? They hadn't done it. So I suggested that we look in the bag and see if anything identified the wrongdoers, and of course the finger was pointed at our group. And I suggested that the punishment lay squarely with the tent leader. But my fellow leaders decided that instead the whole tent should be for it. And so began a week of pot washing and, worst of all, emptying the slop buckets every night after dinner. And so forgiveness needs to be sought, I'm sure you will see, not from the goody two-shoes tent leader. He got what was coming to him and is probably an investment banker or an arms dealer.
Right. Oh,
Wow.
Those two things being equivalent.
Or
right. Okay.
Sentence hasn't finished yet. There's a final flourish. It's probably an investment banker, an arms dealer, or in prison. Or maybe all three. No, I seek forgiveness from the other 8 boys in the tent. They, by all accounts, still enjoyed the camp, but the look of nausea on their faces emptying the slop bucket every night spoke volumes. I should have mentioned that there's a slop bucket.
You did say that. That's fine.
Yeah, I should have warned people at the beginning. Anyway, not long after the camp, I took my leave from the brigade. Quite right. As I changed jobs, and to this day I've never admitted what I did, and hope that some forgiveness will unburden me of this sin. Many thanks for reading, and that's from Alexander. I don't think Alexander was cut out for the rigours of leadership in the fabulous Boys Brigade. But let's see where the blame lies as far as Sister Susie is concerned.
Well, I think, Alexander, you did it. It was your fault. You should have owned up to it. 8 other boys got punishment for something you did. And I just can't... The slops bucket sounds disgusting as well. And it's like the dregs of the drip trays in the pub at the end of the night. And it's just...
I think it was worse than that.
No one's interested in that. It just makes you feel a bit ill. And I just think that you just should have owned up. And you didn't. And for that reason, I can't forgive you.
It's just the leader's firstborn, that entitlement. We've all spotted that over the years. Brother Matthew.
Once again, we come across this calamity that is collective punishment, where people decide that because no one comes forward and admits what they've done, then the entire class, the entire tent in this case, is going to be punished. And where's the justice in that? No justice at all, is what I say. And so therefore it's society's fault again, isn't it? It's the system, it's the whatever is going on, whoever's in charge at this particular tent. It's the man in charge, and that's the one to blame, and not Alexander, who was obviously just using the system to work in his favour. So for that reason, I'm going to forgive.
You are going to forgive. That to no one's great surprise. Okay, does Alexander get forgiveness in your house or in your car, in your mind? Let us know. 61054, first word is Simon. Today's confession, just before the 6 o'clock news from Alexander, was another Boys Brigade confession, actually, and concerned Alexander's failed plan to bring down the spoilt, entitled son of the leader, soon to be an arms dealer, investment banker, or just in prison, by planting evidence in a bin bag to incriminate the said boy. But actually, everyone got punished instead, everyone in the tent. So that'll learn you. People's verdict like this.
So Joshua in Lowestoft says, I'm completely forgiving tonight's confession. Wasn't it the system to blame, really? Matt is right, as always, the teacher of forgiveness, lol.
Joshua,
many thanks.
That's pathetic.
Great show, as always.
Yes.
Sammy in Chester says, not forgiven. He should have owned up. Can't believe he let 8 people take the blame.
Right.
And finally, as a leader in girl guiding, I fully understand why Alexander did what he did. It happens in our organisation too. Totally forgiven, says Mrs. Anonymous.
Well, Mrs. Anonymous and other people involved in guiding and scouting and
Yes.
boys brigading, we would like to hear your confessions. They can be as anonymous as you like. We changed the names anyway. confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. If we use yours, you get a smart speaker, and then they're all edited together in an entertaining way, I think, with some salt and pepper over the top in the Confessions podcast,
Oh, right.
which arrives on Friday. It's confession time, and even though producer Susie isn't in the pub, she's actually brought the drinks trolley on the train from Bristol,
I have.
which is a fantastic thing. And what have you grabbed from the trolley as it's gone sliding past?
Well, I think Matt will like this one. I've grabbed a rather large bottle of Kraken rum.
Oh.
You can have it with Coke if you
Yes,
like.
please.
Or you could have it with mint and lime topped up with soda, and it's like a black mojito.
Okay.
Okay, maybe we'll leave that for a little bit later
Rum
on.
and Coke.
Thank you very much.
With a twist.
And then Nigel will have some more food and drink suggestions for you very shortly. Today's confession comes from Tommy. Yes, Father Simon, Sister Susie and Holly, and that geezer in the gutter.
That's me.
I'm afraid this is how you're being
Yeah,
referred to.
Yep.
My confession dates back to the mid-1990s when I was a newly qualified mechanic in my first proper job at a small garage in Dorset. It was the sort of garage that had a large clientele of older customers with similarly older vehicles, and as a result, we could be called on to do almost anything from an oil change to an engine rebuild. One older gentleman, called Cecil, had a run of trouble with his car, and each time the problems just seemed to get worse, or at least that was what he told the garage owner, who we'll refer to as Bob, on his seemingly weekly phone calls. And shortly after each call, he would arrive in his fairly nondescript saloon car with his wife in tow, this is Cecil, complain vigorously about whatever work we had performed on his previous visit, and then add more mystery faults that my boss would feel duty-bound to investigate. Initially, he had trouble with the ignition, then the brakes, we replaced the clutch, and after that he insisted we overhaul the gearbox. Every time he came back with more troubles and woes. The pistons, sorted that. Crankshaft, sorted that. Timing belts, that too. The oil pan, the connecting rod, the camshaft, you name it. He said it was not working properly, and by this time Bob was spitting teeth as the gentleman considered our garage had actually caused all of it. These faults were our fault, and it was proving difficult to persuade him that he should be paying for our time. So basically, he wanted it all done for free because the garage caused the problems in the first place. Obviously, the gentleman should cut his losses and change his car and hopefully not bring the next one to us. But how can we suggest this to him? Well, what would you do? Father Simon, as a young boy, I was a chorister. One of the other mechanics, let's call him Bryn, was from the Welsh Valleys, and he would commonly be heard singing, mainly because there was no lock on the loo. But anyway, apart from that, we could hold a tune, the two of us. And so I hatched a plan. A little bit of period technology involved here. Reaching into the glove box of Cecil's car, I found a selection of cassettes. It seemed our customer liked to listen to jazz. Nice. Choosing one at random, I took a piece of chewing gum and blocked the record protect hole. The tape was partly wound so we could interrupt transmission for a message. My idea was to record something explaining that the car was really fit for the scrapyard and he should let go of it. So Bob had gone to lunch, so Bryn and I set to recording a message. Unexpectedly, Bryn started singing. It turned into quite a nice little tune. And I added a suggestion towards the end of the song as to what Cecil could do with his car. Which may not be entirely suitable for a tea time audience, or in fact, physically possible. But, in my defence, frustration had by now taken over. The cassette was rewound, placed back in its case, and left on top of the pile. We never saw Cecil again.
No.
I can only assume he played the tape soon after, maybe with his wife in the car, and she agreed with our suggestions as to what he should be doing. So 30 years on, I'm not really asking for forgiveness from Cecil, as he stopped coming back and Bob started to look slightly less harassed before too long. I'm not asking for forgiveness from Bob for the potential bad press that could have come about had our antics been relayed to the local paper. No, I'm asking for a pardon from the late Kenny Ball and his Jazzmen, for it was one of his tapes that Bryn and I ruined. Let's Sing a Happy Song, I think, was the album, which is quite ironic, considering we made a complete mess of it. Tommy, well, I think this is quite creative, and instead of being rude to Cecil's face, he was rude via the... you would have thought pre-recorded cassette, but if you knew how to re-record, then that was what the chewing gum was for. Anyway, this is probably before your time, Sister Susie, but anyway, what do you say to Tommy?
Well, Tommy, I just think, I don't know what you achieved here, because surely you just sent away business to your boss's garage.
He was driving them mad.
Yeah, but he might have been driving him mad, but he was spending the big bucks, wasn't he? Getting all of those things fixed. And I do like a cassette. I used to have a New Kids on the Block one when I was a younger,
of course, we all
younger lad.
And
one of the regulars in the pub recently brought me a Rolling Stones cassette tape, saying I might like that. So but I don't think I forgive Tommy, even though he might have had a nice voice with Bryn from the Valleys. I just think you just ruined all the business of your boss Bob, and he should have just smiled and nodded.
Taking the hard line, as producers are required to do. However, I suspect more leniency from
yes,
other men.
I'm going to forgive. And here's the reason why. Is Cecil, I mean, I'm not a mechanic, but I'm going to say, Cecil, if you're getting all those things replaced on your car, then maybe it's not the car's fault. Maybe it's all down to you, Cecil. I also love the fact that they're doing this on cassette, because you can do that. You could do that back in the day, couldn't you? You could record onto cassettes. And you can't do that now because that wouldn't work because no one's got cassette players in the cars.
No, that's true.
So for that reason, because of cassette players and cars that don't need fixing, I'm going to be forgiven.
Quite sure of the logic.
Yeah, no, definitely works. Think about it, though.
Okay, People's Verdict, please, do you forgive Tommy for his motor car cassette-based Kenny Ball confession?
Kenny Ball.
We haven't had a Kenny Ball in the Jazzman confession ever before. Maybe it's the first of many. Anyway, 61054. First word is Simon. But just before, and also Nigel is performing another of the kitchen's greatest hits. But before the news at 6 o'clock, we had a confession from Tommy the mechanic. A story about Cecil, the old guy, complaining about everything going wrong on his car, driving everybody crazy. And so Tommy and his friend sort of recorded a little message on a jazz cassette. Cecil got the message and never returned. People's Verdict, here we go.
Jennifer in Woking says, totally forgiven. That customer sounds like an absolute nightmare. The cassette with the chorister voice sounds hilarious. John in Ashton says, not forgiving, as ruining a cassette is sacrilegious. I love cassettes. Music should never be ruined, even if a customer is winding you up. And Daz says, forgiven. I work as a mechanic and have dealt with taps like these before. Absolute nightmares. Wish I could do the same.
Well, Daz, maybe you can. I suppose there aren't too many cassette machines anymore, but given the chance. So maybe you have another confession, in which case we'd like to have it. Confessions at greatesthitsradio.co.